People always say that no one can steal your identity unless you hand it to them. I used to believe that too. Then my own sister proved them wrong. She didn't just take my name. She took my marriage. She took my friends. She took my reputation. She even convinced people I was the imposter. And by the time I realized how far she'd gone, almost everyone I loved believed her instead of me. What none of us knew was that the truth hiding underneath her lies was darker than anything I could have imagined. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if the betrayal started years before I ever noticed it. Maybe I simply ignored the warning signs because admitting them would have meant admitting something impossible. That the person who had shared my childhood bedroom had quietly spent her entire life trying to become me. Before we dive deeper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy powerful stories filled with shocking betrayals, family secrets, and hard-earned justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. My name is Abigail Mercer. I'm 39 years old, and until 2 years ago, I thought I understood exactly who I was. I lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where life moved slowly enough that everyone recognized familiar faces at the local grocery store. I worked as a senior graphic designer for a publishing company that specialized in children's books. It wasn't glamorous work, but I loved it. Creating illustrations that made children smile gave me a strange kind of peace. After long days in front of a computer screen, I would come home to our white colonial house on Maple Ridge Lane. Waiting there was my husband, Brandon Sterling. We had been married for 13 years. People described us as dependable. Not exciting, not dramatic, just dependable. We had survived layoffs, financial setbacks, and the heartbreaking disappointment of learning we couldn't have children. Some couples don't recover from that kind of grief. We almost didn't. But after years of counseling and countless difficult conversations, we rebuilt something quieter. A marriage based less on grand romance and more on genuine partnership. At least that's what I believed. Then my younger sister came back into my life. Lillian Mercer had always been impossible to describe with one word. Beautiful? Absolutely. Charming? Without question. Honest? Not even close. Growing up, she'd been the kind of child who could break a vase, convince our parents I had done it, then comfort me afterward while pretending she felt terrible about my punishment. It was almost impressive. She never raised her voice. She never seemed cruel. She simply understood people better than anyone else. She knew exactly what they wanted to hear. As adults, we drifted apart. She moved from city to city, chasing jobs that never lasted. There was always a new boyfriend, a new business idea, a new explanation for why everything had fallen apart. Every phone call sounded like the beginning of a different life. Our mother called her adventurous. I called her restless. When our parents passed away within 18 months of each other, I hoped grief might finally bring us closer. Instead, it drove us further apart. She disappeared for almost 3 years. No birthday calls, no holiday messages, nothing. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, she appeared outside my office carrying a single suitcase. She looked exhausted. Her blonde hair hung in damp strands around her face. Mascara streaked beneath her eyes. For the first time in my life, she didn't seem confident. She looked frightened. "Abby," she whispered as soon as she saw me, "I have nowhere else to go." Every painful childhood memory should have told me to walk away. Instead, I hugged her, because that's what sisters do. Or at least that's what I thought sisters were supposed to do. Braden welcomed her without hesitation. "We have a guest room," he said with his usual kindness. "Stay until you get back on your feet," she cried. Real tears. At least they looked real. "I'll only be here a few weeks," she promised. "I just need a fresh start." A few weeks turned into months. She found a temporary job at a boutique downtown. She helped cook dinner. She laughed with Brandon while I worked late. She folded laundry before I got home. She brought flowers to the kitchen table every Friday. Slowly, she became part of our routine. Looking back, that's what frightens me the most. Nothing happened all at once. She didn't storm into my life and steal it overnight. She blended into it so naturally that I never noticed the boundaries disappearing. At first, the changes seemed harmless. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and found Brandon laughing harder than I'd seen in months. Lillian was telling one of our old childhood stories. Except, she was telling it as though it had happened to her. I laughed and corrected her. "No, Lil, That was me who fell off Grandpa's dock. She smiled. Oh my goodness, you're right. Everyone laughed. It seemed insignificant, until she did it again, and again. Stories that belonged to me slowly became hers. She'd tell people she was the artistic sister, that she'd always dreamed of illustrating books, that she'd been the one caring for our mother during her illness. None of those things were true, but she said them so naturally that no one questioned her. Sometimes even I wondered if I was remembering correctly. Then there was Brandon. He insisted I was imagining things. She's just trying to reconnect, he'd say. You're reading too much into everything. Maybe I was. After all, she'd changed, hadn't she? She seemed calmer, kinder, more responsible. One Saturday morning I left early for a work conference in Concord. It was only an overnight trip, nothing unusual. Around dinner time I called home. No answer. I texted Brandon. Nothing. I figured they'd gone out. The next morning I received a photo from Lillian. She and Brandon were standing in our backyard beside the vegetable garden. She captioned it, "Keeping your husband busy while you're away." A smiling emoji followed. Something about the wording unsettled me, but when I mentioned it later, Brandon laughed. It was just a joke. Lillian laughed too. You know me. Yes. I did know her. Or at least I thought I did. Little things kept happening. Friends would compliment her earrings. They're beautiful, Abby. She'd smile before I could answer. They were a birthday gift. The problem? They had been my birthday gift. Somehow, my belongings quietly became hers. Not by theft, by assumption. If someone believed they belonged to her, she never corrected them. Then one afternoon, I stopped by the coffee shop near my office. The barista smiled brightly. Back again today? I blinked. No, she frowned. You were just here this morning. I wasn't. She stared at me, then looked confused. Oh, I laughed it off, until it happened again. Different grocery store, different cashier, different conversation. Weren't you just in here with your husband? No, I hadn't been. Someone had. Someone who looked enough like me to fool strangers. Someone wearing my favorite blue coat. I drove home with a knot growing in my stomach. Inside the house, I opened the hallway closet. My blue coat was gone. Lillian walked downstairs wearing it. She smiled. I hope you don't mind. It looked lonely hanging there. I forced a smile. Just ask next time. Of course. She kissed my cheek. I didn't think you'd care. Maybe I shouldn't have cared. Maybe sisters borrowed clothes. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. But paranoia doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows from tiny moments your instincts refuse to ignore. The first real crack appeared during my company's annual fundraising gala. It was the biggest event of the year. Brandon had attended every one with me. We were expected. People knew us. Halfway through the evening, one of my coworkers approached us looking puzzled. She hugged Lillian. It finally makes sense. I frowned. What does? She laughed. I always wondered why your husband looked so different in your vacation photos. I stared at her. What vacation photos? The ones you posted last month. I didn't post any vacation photos. She looked embarrassed. Oh. She pulled out her phone. There, on social media, was an account using my maiden name, Abigail Mercer. The profile picture looked exactly like me, except it wasn't me. It was Lillian. She had carefully chosen photos where our resemblance was strongest. She'd copied pictures from my real account, mixed them with her own. She'd even posted old family photos where we appeared together. To someone who didn't know us personally, the account looked authentic. My heart pounded as I scrolled. Vacation memories that belonged to me. Anniversary photos cropped to remove me. Captions written in the first person. My wonderful husband. Every picture of Brandon had been reposted as though he were standing beside her. I looked at him. He looked genuinely shocked. Lil, she went pale. I can explain, but for the first time, I wasn't interested in explanations. I wanted answers. And I had no idea that discovering the fake social media account was only the beginning. Because someone had already started believing that Lillian Mercer wasn't pretending to be Abigail Mercer. They believed she actually was. And soon, that lie would turn my entire life upside down. I wish I could tell you that I confronted Lillian that night and everything unraveled immediately. It didn't. If anything, that was the moment she became even more convincing. Standing in the middle of the hotel ballroom, She looked from me to Brandon with tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant for anyone to misunderstand," she said softly. "I only made the account because I didn't want people from my past finding me." My coworkers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them whispered, "Maybe this should be a private conversation." Lillian nodded quickly. "Please. I don't want to ruin Abigail's evening." Even then, she managed to make herself sound considerate. Once we got home, I demanded she hand me her phone. Instead, she calmly unlocked it and placed it in my hand. "Look through everything." I did. The fake account was gone. Deleted. She had removed it before we even left the gala. "I realized it was stupid," she said. "I deleted it. You used my name. I know. You posted pictures of my husband. I wasn't thinking. You became me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." She looked so remorseful that Brandon gently rested a hand on my shoulder. "She apologized, Abby." I stared at him. "You think an apology fixes this?" "No." "Then why are you defending her?" "I'm not defending her. I'm trying to keep this family together." Family. That word had trapped me my entire life. Every time Lillian crossed a line, someone reminded me we were family. Every time I objected, I became the unreasonable sister. I looked at Brandon. "I want her gone." Silence filled the room. Lillian slowly stood. "If that's what you want." She picked up her suitcase. She made it all the way to the front door before Brandon spoke. "Wait." I closed my eyes. He sighed. "It's almost midnight." "So?" "She has nowhere to go. That isn't our responsibility anymore." He looked genuinely conflicted. "Can we at least wait until tomorrow?" Lillian whispered, "Please." One night, that was all he asked. I agreed. It became one of the biggest mistakes of my life. The next morning, I left early for work. When I came home that evening, Lillian's suitcase was gone. So were several boxes from the guest room. Relief washed over me. Finally, then I noticed Brandon sitting alone in the living room. "You look upset," I said. I drove her to a motel. "And?" She kept crying. I sat beside him. "I know this is hard. I just hate seeing families fall apart." I leaned against his shoulder. "So do I." For a few days, life felt normal again. The house was quiet. No unexpected laughter from the guest room. No borrowed clothes. No strange comments from strangers. I thought the nightmare was over. Then my bank called. "Mrs. Barrett? This is Abigail. We noticed an unusual request regarding your joint account." "What request?" "A change of mailing address." "I didn't request that." The representative paused. "It was submitted yesterday." My stomach tightened. "What address?" She read it aloud. It was the motel where Lillian was staying. I nearly dropped my phone. "I never authorized that. We'll freeze the request immediately." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Someone had tried to redirect our financial records. I called Brandon. He sounded just as shocked. "I'll leave work now." That evening we visited the bank together. The manager reviewed the paperwork. "I'll bring up the scanned documents." The signature appeared on the screen. It looked exactly like mine. Every loop, every curve, every letter. Perfect. Except, I hadn't signed it. The manager frowned. "Our records show valid identification was presented." "What identification?" "A driver's license." "In whose name?" He hesitated. "Abigail Barrett." "My own driver's license." Only I still had mine. Someone had produced another one, with my name, my birth date, my address, but a different photograph. Lillian's. The manager looked uncomfortable. "We've already reported it." I felt sick. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. Someone had created fake government identification. Within 2 weeks, stranger things began happening. Packages I hadn't ordered arrived at the house. Credit card applications appeared in my mailbox. A luxury furniture company called asking when I'd like my order delivered. I never placed an order. "But we spoke yesterday." "No, we didn't." The representative hesitated. "You sounded exactly like you do now." I immediately checked my credit report. Several new inquiries appeared. Someone was trying to build an entirely new financial life, using my identity. The police took my report. Detective Caleb Monroe listened carefully. "Identity theft cases are difficult." "You think I don't know who did it?" "I didn't say that. It's my sister." "Do you have evidence?" "I have years of manipulation." "That isn't enough for criminal charges." He wasn't dismissive. He was realistic. Evidence. I needed proof, not suspicion. Meanwhile, Lillian somehow remained connected to my life. Mutual friends mentioned seeing her around town. Some thought we'd reconciled. Others assumed she was me. One afternoon, my longtime hairstylist smiled as I walked into the salon. Back already? No. You were here 3 days ago. I wasn't. She stopped smiling. Yuki stared at my face, then quietly whispered, "Have a twin." "No. I have a sister." The stylist nodded slowly. "She told everyone she was you." I felt my chest tighten. What exactly did she say? She said you'd decided to use your maiden name professionally again. My knees nearly gave out. She wasn't simply pretending online anymore. She was introducing herself as me in public. The damage spread faster than I imagined. A client from work emailed me. "Thank you for lunch yesterday." I'd never had lunch with him. Another coworker asked whether Brandon had enjoyed the concert. "What concert?" "The one you both attended Saturday." We'd spent Saturday cleaning the garage. Someone else had gone. Someone pretending to be us. Every lie strengthened another. Every false memory replaced a real one. I began keeping a notebook. Every mistaken identity. Every strange phone call. Every fraudulent account. Every witness. By the end of the month, the notebook was nearly full. Then something happened that nearly destroyed my career. My supervisor called me into his office. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. We received a complaint. About what? He slid a printed email across the desk. According to the sender, I'd met with a freelance illustrator representing our company and promised him a contract in exchange for a private payment. Bribery. I stared at the email. I've never met this man. He included photographs. There she was, Lillian, from behind, wearing one of my blazers. My hairstyle. Even my reading glasses. Anyone who didn't know us personally would believe it was me. I didn't do this. I believe you. But human resources has to investigate. I walked out of his office barely able to breathe. Years of hard work. Threatened because someone wore my clothes and my name. That evening, I expected Brandon to comfort me. Instead, he seemed distracted. He barely looked up from his phone during dinner. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. You seem distant." "I'm just tired." Later that night, I heard his phone buzz. He was already asleep. The screen lit up. A message appeared. "Thank you for always believing in me. I don't know what I'd do without you. Lillian." My stomach dropped. I wasn't angry that she'd texted him. I was angry because he hadn't told me they were still speaking. The next morning, I asked him directly, "Are you in contact with her?" He looked surprised. Sometimes. She calls when she's upset. And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I didn't want another fight. "It isn't about fighting, Brandon. It's about honesty." He rubbed his forehead. "She's alone. She chose that. She's still your sister." There it was again. Family. Always family, never accountability. 3 nights later, I woke just after 2 in the morning. The front porch motion light had turned on. I walked to the window. A woman stood across the street, watching the house. She wore a hooded sweatshirt. Even from that distance, I knew exactly who it was. Lillian. She wasn't trying to come inside. She wasn't knocking. She was simply standing there, looking at my home, like someone studying a life she believed belonged to her. I reached for my phone. By the time I looked up again, she was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't watching the house. She was waiting for the moment she could step completely into my life. I still believed the worst thing she wanted was my identity. I was wrong, because only days later, I would uncover something far more devastating. It wasn't just my name she intended to keep. It was my husband. There are moments in life when your instincts whisper the truth long before your mind is willing to believe it. For weeks, I'd ignored that whisper. I told myself Brandon was only trying to be compassionate, that Lillian was manipulating him the way she'd manipulated people her entire life. I never considered that he might be choosing to believe her over me. I found out on an ordinary Thursday. I had left work early because a summer storm had knocked out power across part of Portsmouth. Our office closed for the afternoon, and I decided to surprise Brandon with lunch. His office wasn't far from mine. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed his SUV wasn't there. I checked the time, 12:30. He should have been in the middle of a meeting. Thinking he might have gone out with coworkers, I called him. Straight to voicemail. A few minutes later, he texted. In a meeting. Can't talk. Something about it felt rehearsed. I almost drove home. Instead, I stopped at a cafe across town to grab a coffee before heading back. As I waited for my order, I glanced through the large front window. A familiar silver SUV slowly pulled into the parking lot across the street. Brandon's. He stepped out, then walked around to the passenger side. Lillian climbed out. She was laughing. He smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. Not politely, not sympathetically, comfortably, naturally. He reached into the back seat, pulled out an umbrella, and held it over both of them as they walked into a restaurant together. Neither of them looked guilty. They looked familiar, like two people who had done this before. I couldn't move. I kept waiting for some innocent explanation. Maybe they were discussing my situation. Maybe she had asked for advice. Maybe. Then Brandon gently placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered the restaurant. It was such a simple gesture, one he'd done to me for years, without thinking, without noticing. That was the moment my heart broke. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting in my parked car outside our house for nearly an hour. My phone buzzed. Brandon. Hey, he said cheerfully. How's your day? I closed my eyes. Busy. Mine too. Another lie. I'll probably work late. Lie number 2. I'll see you tonight, I whispered. Okay. When I hung up, I cried harder than I had since my parents died. Not because I'd caught him, because he had lied so easily. That evening I said nothing. I watched him describe meetings that never happened, co-workers he'd never seen, problems at work that didn't exist. He had built an entire afternoon out of fiction. Across the dinner table, I realized I no longer recognized the man I'd spent 13 years loving. Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped confronting people. Instead, I started watching. I documented everything. Times, dates, phone calls, receipts, photographs. If Lillian had taught me anything, it was that feelings weren't evidence. Facts were. One Friday evening, Brandon claimed he was attending a networking event. After he left, I opened our shared tablet. He'd forgotten it synchronized with his phone. A notification appeared. Dinner was wonderful. I wish things were different. Lillian. A minute later, Brandon replied. We'll figure everything out soon. My hands trembled so violently, I nearly dropped the tablet. We'll figure everything out. What exactly were they trying to figure out? I hired a private investigator the following Monday. Declan Rhodes was nothing like I'd imagined. No expensive suit, no dramatic introductions, just a quiet man in his early 50s who listened without interrupting. When I finished explaining everything, he leaned back in his chair. You believe your sister stole your identity? Yes. And your husband is involved. I don't know how involved. He nodded. I'll find out. How long? As long as the truth takes. 3 days later, Declan called. I need to see you. His voice sounded unusually serious. We met in a quiet park near the waterfront. He handed me an envelope. Inside were photographs. Brandon and Lillian, holding hands, leaving restaurants, walking through stores, checking into a small inn outside town. The dates stretched back nearly 4 months. 4 months. Long before I'd forced her to leave my house. I stared at the pictures until they blurred. I knew they were close, I whispered. I didn't know. Declan spoke gently. I'm sorry. I swallowed hard. Is it an affair? He hesitated. I don't think that's the whole story. What does that mean? They aren't acting like people hiding a romance. I frowned. What are they acting like? Partners. The word chilled me. Partners. Not lovers. Working together. Over the next week, Declan uncovered something even stranger. Lillian wasn't only introducing herself as Abigail Mercer. She was introducing Brandon as her husband, and Brandon wasn't correcting anyone. Hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, community events. Whenever someone assumed they were married, he simply smiled. I felt physically ill. I finally confronted him. I laid the photographs across our dining room table. He turned pale. Where did you get these? Does it matter? It does. No. Silence. Then he slowly sat down. I can explain. Please do. He rubbed both hands over his face. It isn't what it looks like. I almost laughed. Really? I've been helping her. By pretending to be married? It wasn't pretending. I stared. He immediately corrected himself. I mean, too late. The words had already escaped. He looked trapped, cornered, as if he'd rehearsed every possible conversation except this one. Tell me the truth. He looked down. I promised her. You promised my sister what? That I'd protect her. From what? He didn't answer. That night he slept in the guest room. For the first time in 13 years. I didn't cry. I was too exhausted. Too numb. The next afternoon, Declan called again. I followed Lillian. And? She visited a storage facility. So? She rents 2 units. What's inside? I couldn't get access, but I saw someone else leave. Who? Declan slid another photograph across the cafe table. The man looked to be in his 60s. Gray hair, expensive suit, sharp features. I'd never seen him before. Do you know him? No. He has visited those storage units 7 times this month. Who is he? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. That evening, I returned home expecting another argument. Instead, Brandon was waiting in the living room. He looked as though he hadn't slept. I need to tell you something. I folded my arms. I'm listening. He opened his mouth. Before he could speak, someone pounded on the front door. Not knocked. Pounded. When I opened it, Detective Caleb Monroe stood on my porch. His expression was grim. I need both of you to come with me. Why? We've received a report of financial fraud involving your identity. I already reported that. I know. This is different. He looked directly at me. Mrs. Barrett. He paused. Someone has emptied nearly every dollar from your retirement account. My heart stopped. What? The transfer was authorized this morning. I've been home all day. I believe you. Then who signed it? He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The authorization came from someone who presented herself as Abigail Mercer. I felt the blood drain from my face. Lillian. She'd finally done it. She hadn't just stolen my identity anymore. She'd stolen my future. But as devastating as that news was, it wasn't what terrified Detective Monroe. Before we left the house, he quietly pulled me aside. There was something else. What? The woman using your identity. He lowered his voice. She claims you're the one pretending to be her. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just identity theft anymore. Someone was preparing to erase me completely. When Detective Caleb Monroe said those words, I felt as though the ground disappeared beneath me. I stared at him, waiting for him to tell me it was some kind of misunderstanding. He didn't. Instead, he handed me a folder. Inside were copies of statements Lillian had given investigators. Every page made my stomach twist. According to her, she was Abigail Mercer. I was supposedly her older sister who had become obsessed with taking over her life after our parents died. She claimed I had copied her signature, copied her clothes, copied her marriage, copied her social media. She even told them I had been receiving counseling for delusional behavior. It was so outrageous that I almost laughed. Almost. Because the more I read, the more I realized how carefully she'd built the lie. She hadn't started last month. She'd been laying the foundation for years. Detective Monroe sighed. We've spoken with several people. And? They support parts of her story. My chest tightened. How? She introduced herself to them months before you reported anything. I closed the folder. She planned this. It appears that way. When the detective left, Brandon finally spoke. There are things I should have told you. I looked at him without saying a word. I met Lillian before she came to our house. The room went silent. What? It was about 6 months earlier. You told me you'd had no contact with her. I lied. My heart pounded. Why? He looked ashamed. She contacted me through social media. My breathing became shallow. She said she wanted to surprise you by reconnecting. And you believed her? At first. How long were you talking to her? Almost 6 months. I felt sick. So when she showed up at our front door, it wasn't an accident. You invited her. He slowly nodded. I thought I was helping repair your relationship. I laughed bitterly. You didn't think to ask me? She begged me not to. Why? She said you'd refuse to see her. She was right. Because I knew exactly who she was. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. For the next hour, I sat alone on our back porch, replaying every conversation from the past year. Every coincidence, every lie, Every time Brandon had defended her, he hadn't been manipulated overnight. He'd already been under her influence before she moved into our home. The following morning, Declan Rhodes called. I know who the older man is. I drove straight to his office. He slid a photograph across his desk. This is Charles Whitlock. The name meant nothing to me. Who is he? He's a retired financial consultant. What does he have to do with Lillian? Declan leaned forward. Everything. He opened another folder. 5 years ago, Charles Whitlock was investigated for helping clients hide assets through fraudulent identity transfers. My pulse quickened. Was he convicted? No. They couldn't prove it. I stared at the papers. So now he's helping Lillian? I believe he's been coaching her. To steal my identity? Declan nodded. But that's not the interesting part. There's more? He handed me another document. It was a death certificate. The name at the top stopped me cold. Elizabeth Mercer. My grandmother. She had died nearly 30 years earlier. What am I looking at? Look at the witnesses. I read the names. One signature belonged to my grandfather. The other, Charles Whitlock. I frowned. My grandmother knew him? So did your parents? A chill ran down my spine. That afternoon, I drove to my late parents' house. It had been empty since their passing, but I still had a key. For hours, I searched through old boxes in the attic. Then, tucked inside an old cedar chest, I found a locked wooden box. I remembered it immediately. My mother had always kept it hidden. She once told me it contained things that should only be opened if absolutely necessary. I had never asked about it again. The lock was old. It broke easily. Inside were dozens of letters. Most were written by my grandmother. One envelope was addressed to my mother. Across the front, she'd written, "If the girls ever begin asking questions, tell them everything." My hands shook as I unfolded the pages. The first paragraph stole my breath. Margaret, if you're reading this, then Charles has probably returned. Returned? I continued reading. Years earlier, Charles Whitlock had worked with my grandfather. He had convinced several families to transfer property into relatives' names to avoid taxes. When authorities began investigating, my grandfather walked away. Charles didn't. He blamed my family for abandoning him. According to my grandmother, he'd spent years threatening revenge. Then I reached the final page. The letter ended with a sentence that turned my entire world upside down. One day, he may try to divide the girls. If he does, remember this. Only one of them knows the truth about the adoption. The adoption? I reread the sentence, again and again. Surely I was misunderstanding. I tore through the rest of the box. Finally, beneath several birth certificates, I found legal papers. Adoption papers, dated 37 years earlier. I scanned the names. The child being adopted wasn't me. It was Lillian. I sat frozen on the attic floor. Lillian wasn't my biological sister. She had been adopted when she was an infant. My parents had never told either of us. Tears blurred my vision. Not because she was adopted. That changed nothing about how I'd loved her. But because she'd always known. There was another envelope. This one addressed to Lillian. Unopened. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother. Sweetheart, being adopted never made you less our daughter. We waited until you were old enough to understand, but every time we tried, we became afraid of losing you. Another paragraph caught my eye. Please don't ever let Charles Whitlock convince you that you were unwanted. He has already tried once. My heart raced. Charles. He'd known. For decades. Suddenly, everything made sense. Lillian hadn't simply decided to become me. Someone had spent years convincing her that my life should have been hers. That I had stolen something from her. That she deserved my marriage. My career. My identity. She hadn't created the fantasy alone. Someone had carefully planted it, fed it, nurtured it, until she believed it completely. I immediately called Declan. I found something. Let me guess. You already know. I suspected. Lillian is adopted. He was quiet for a moment. There's something else. What? I've been watching Charles. And? He met with Brandon yesterday. Every muscle in my body tensed. What? They spoke for nearly an hour. I couldn't believe it. No, I'm afraid so. My heart sank. Brandon hadn't just been deceived by Lillian. He was meeting secretly with the very man behind everything. But why? Was he helping them? Or was there another reason he had been keeping so many secrets from me? As I drove home, two questions consumed my thoughts. If Brandon had already discovered the truth, why hadn't he told me? And what was he still hiding? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another piece of the puzzle slid into place, only to leave behind an even bigger question. Lillian had known she was adopted. Charles Whitlock had been manipulating her for years, and Brandon, my husband, had met with Charles behind my back. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. When Brandon finally came downstairs, he looked exhausted. He stopped when he saw me. "You've been up all night." I nodded. "I know about Charles." The color drained from his face. "I can explain." I stood before he could say another word. "No." His shoulders slumped. "I've listened to explanations for months. I've listened to lies disguised as kindness. I've listened to excuses disguised as loyalty." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "This time, you're going to tell me the whole truth." For several long seconds, he didn't speak. Then he quietly said something I never expected. "I never had an affair with Lillian." I stared at him. "After everything I've seen, that's where you want to start? Because it's the truth." I folded my arms. "Then explain the photographs. The hotel. The text messages." "I'll explain." I took a deep breath. "You have exactly one chance." Brandon sat down across from me. "It started almost a year ago." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "Lillian contacted me through social media. She said she'd spent years trying to reconnect with you, but was too ashamed." I didn't interrupt. She said she'd made terrible mistakes and wanted to surprise you by rebuilding your relationship. "So you believed her?" I did. His eyes filled with regret. I thought I was helping. He looked down at the table. "Then she told me something that terrified me." "What?" "She said someone had been following her." I frowned. "Charles?" He nodded. "She said he knew secrets about your family and was threatening to destroy everyone if she didn't cooperate." I remembered my grandmother's letter. Charles had been haunting our family for decades. "I told her to go to the police," Brandon continued. "She refused." "Why?" "She said nobody would believe her." Ironically, she'd been right. "So why did you keep meeting her?" "Because every time I tried to walk away, she'd panic." His voice broke. "She'd call crying. She'd tell me Charles wanted her to replace you." A chill ran down my spine. "Replace me?" I thought she was having some kind of mental breakdown. I slowly sat down again. "She actually said those words?" He nodded. "She kept saying she didn't have a choice anymore." I wanted to believe him, but too many questions remained. "The photographs. I met her because I was trying to convince her to leave town." "The hotel?" "She wouldn't meet me anywhere else. She said Charles watched public places." "The messages?" "They were about getting her away from him." I looked at him carefully. "If that's true," "It is." "Why didn't you tell me?" He closed his eyes. "Because she threatened to kill herself if I did." The room fell silent. "I thought I could fix it myself." His voice cracked. "I thought if I could get her away from Charles, everything would go back to normal." I shook my head slowly. "You should have trusted me." "I know. I was your wife." "I know." Instead, he had tried to carry everything alone. And in doing so, he'd nearly destroyed our marriage. Before either of us could speak again, my phone rang. "Declan, you need to come to my office." His voice was urgent. "What happened?" "I searched the second storage unit." "You got inside?" "Yes." "And?" There was a pause. "I found your life." An hour later, Brandon and I arrived at the storage facility with Detective Monroe. Declan unlocked the metal door. I gasped. Shelves lined every wall, each one filled with labeled plastic containers. Every container represented another part of my life. Photo albums, tax returns, medical records, old birthday cards, school report cards, even childhood drawings I'd made in elementary school. My knees weakened. "How?" Declan pointed toward another shelf. There were dozens of notebooks, each one neatly labeled by year. "What are these?" "Lillian's journals." Detective Monroe carefully opened one. Every page contained handwritten notes, not diary entries, observations, about me, what I wore, how I signed my name, how I laughed, how I spoke, my favorite perfume, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the restaurants I preferred, the books I read, my handwriting, my posture, everything. She hadn't simply copied me. She had studied me. For years. Another box contained something even more disturbing. Voice recordings. Hundreds of them. Detective Monroe pressed play. My own voice filled the room. Except, I wasn't speaking. Lillian had secretly recorded conversations during family dinners, holidays, and ordinary afternoons. She had practiced imitating me, again and again, until even I struggled to tell the difference. I felt physically ill. Then Declan walked toward a locked filing cabinet. We almost missed this. Inside were legal documents. Charles Whitlock's name appeared over and over. Property transfers. Forged signatures. Identity theft schemes involving multiple victims across 3 states. Lillian wasn't his first target. She was simply the latest person he'd manipulated. Detective Monroe looked at me. This changes everything. While investigators photographed the evidence, I noticed one final envelope. Unlike the others, it had my name written across the front, in Lillian's handwriting. I opened it carefully. The letter began simply. Abby, if you're reading this, everything has already fallen apart. My heart pounded. I don't know whether you'll ever forgive me, and I don't deserve forgiveness. Tears blurred my vision as I continued. She admitted Charles had found her shortly after our mother's funeral. He told her the adoption had been kept secret because our parents loved me more. He showed her forged documents claiming our parents had planned to leave everything to me. He convinced her that our entire family had lied to her from the beginning. Then he offered her a way to take back the life that should have been hers. At first, she refused. But grief turned into resentment. Resentment turned into obsession. And obsession became something she could no longer control. The final paragraph shattered me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing where your life ended and mine began. I kept telling myself that if I could become you, maybe someone would finally love me the way they loved you. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying. For the first time, I saw not just the sister who had betrayed me. I saw the deeply broken woman she had become. Detective Monroe suddenly received a call. His expression changed instantly. What is it? I asked. He looked up. We've located Charles Whitlock. Relief washed over me. Good. He didn't smile. He isn't alone. Who's with him? The detective hesitated. Lillian. Are they under arrest? Not yet. Why not? He looked directly at me. Because they're driving to your house. Every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't about escape. Charles had spent years orchestrating this plan. Now that it was collapsing, he had nothing left to lose. Neither did Lillian. And somehow, I knew they weren't coming for money. They were coming for the one thing Charles had wanted from the very beginning. Me. By the time Detective Monroe ended the call, every officer in the storage facility was moving. Someone handed him a radio. Another officer rushed toward the parking lot. Declan looked at me. You cannot go home. I have to. Abigail, if they're going there because of me, I'm not hiding. Brandon gently took my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't pull away, not because everything between us was fixed, but because, in that moment, we were finally standing on the same side. The drive back to our neighborhood felt endless. Police vehicles surrounded us. No sirens, no flashing lights. They wanted to arrive without warning Charles. As we turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, my heart nearly stopped. Lillian's sedan was parked in front of our house. Charles Whitlock stood beside it, speaking to her calmly. Neither of them appeared panicked. They looked like two people finishing a conversation. Detective Monroe immediately ordered everyone to stay inside their vehicles. Officers quietly spread throughout the neighborhood. Then Charles looked directly toward us, almost as though he'd been expecting us. He smiled. It wasn't the smile of a frightened man. It was the smile of someone convinced he'd already won. Before anyone could move, Lillian stepped away from him. She looked thinner than I remembered, paler, exhausted. When our eyes met, tears immediately filled hers. She took one hesitant step toward me. Charles grabbed her arm. She flinched. That tiny movement told me more than anything else had. For the first time, I saw genuine fear on my sister's face. "Stay back," Detective Monroe shouted. Charles slowly raised both hands. "I'm unarmed." The officers didn't lower their weapons. "You've made a terrible mistake," Charles said calmly. I think you've been making them for decades, Detective Monroe replied. Charles chuckled. You still don't understand. He turned toward me. Abigail. Hearing my name from his mouth made my skin crawl. You've always believed this was about jealousy. It wasn't? No. His eyes settled on the house behind me. This family ruined my life. I remained silent. 30 years of bitterness poured from him. My business collapsed because your grandfather abandoned me. He refused to commit fraud. Charles laughed. He refused to stand beside me. He looked almost disappointed. So I decided something. What? If I couldn't destroy your grandparents? His smile widened. I'd destroy everything they loved. A chill ran through me. My family had never been the target by chance. We had been chosen. Detective Monroe stepped forward. Charles Whitlock, you're under arrest for conspiracy, identity theft, fraud, forgery, financial crimes, and witness intimidation. Charles barely reacted. Instead, he looked at Lillian. I told you they'd never understand. Lillian shook her head. No. You need me. No. You have nothing without me. She slowly backed away. I had a family. Charles's expression hardened. They lied to you. They loved me. You were second best. She burst into tears. They always loved Abigail more. No! Her scream echoed across the quiet neighborhood. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't pretending to be calm. Years of manipulation shattered all at once. I read Mom's letter, she cried. I know you lied. Charles's smile disappeared. You read. His voice trailed off. The confidence vanished from his face. He realized his control over her was gone. Without warning, Charles turned and ran. He made it only a few yards before officers tackled him to the ground. Within seconds, he was handcuffed. The man who had spent decades manipulating families finally looked exactly what he was. Not powerful, not brilliant, just an aging criminal whose lies had finally caught up with him. Lillian collapsed onto the curb, sobbing uncontrollably. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, she looked at me. I don't deserve to ask this. I said nothing. I'm sorry. The words were barely audible. I know. No. She shook her head desperately. You don't understand. She wiped away tears with trembling hands. I hated myself. I know. I kept thinking. Her voice broke. If I could become you, maybe I'd finally be enough. I felt tears sting my own eyes. You were always enough. She covered her face. I didn't believe that. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would yell. I thought I'd demand answers. Instead, all I saw was a woman whose entire identity had been built on a lie someone else planted inside her. That didn't excuse what she'd done. She had stolen from me. She had betrayed me. She had nearly destroyed my life. But I also couldn't ignore that someone had spent years feeding every insecurity she had until she stopped recognizing herself. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Charles Whitlock accepted a plea agreement after overwhelming evidence from the storage units connected him to multiple identity theft operations spanning several states. He would spend many years behind bars. Lillian also faced criminal charges. She pleaded guilty to identity theft, fraud, and forgery. Because she cooperated fully, turned over every piece of evidence against Charles, and admitted her role from the beginning, the court imposed a reduced sentence along with mandatory long-term psychological treatment. The judge said something I'll never forget. Being manipulated explains how you got here. It does not erase the choices you made once you got here. She was right. Two things could be true at the same time. Lillian had been manipulated, and she was still responsible for the harm she caused. As for my marriage, that wasn't repaired by one apology. Brandon and I separated for nearly 8 months. Not because I stopped loving him, because trust cannot be rebuilt by promises, only by actions. He attended counseling on his own before asking me to join him. He accepted responsibility for every lie he told, even the ones he believed were protecting people. He never blamed Lillian. He never blamed Charles. He blamed the one person whose choices he could control, himself. Slowly, we learned how to speak honestly again. There were painful conversations, long silences, moments when I almost walked away. But there were also moments when I remembered why I'd married him in the first place. Not because he was perfect. Because he was willing to admit when he had failed. A year after everything happened, we renewed our vows. Not in a church. Not in front of hundreds of guests. Just the two of us on the rocky shoreline outside Portsmouth, with the Atlantic stretching endlessly before us. This time, our promises weren't about a perfect future. They were about choosing truth, even when the truth was difficult. I sold the house on Maple Ridge Lane. There were too many memories inside those walls. Too many echoes of the life I'd almost lost. We moved to a smaller home closer to the water, a place that didn't remind me of betrayal every time I walked through the front door. I also returned to illustrating children's books. For months, I couldn't draw. My hands would freeze over the page. Then one afternoon, I sketched two sisters sitting beneath a tree. One was crying. The other simply held her hand. The picture became the beginning of my next project. A story about forgiveness. Not because forgiveness erases the past, but because refusing to let the past define your future is sometimes the greatest victory of all. People occasionally ask me whether I've forgiven Lillian. The answer surprises them. I have. Forgiveness wasn't something I gave her because she earned it. It was something I gave myself because I refused to let bitterness become my new identity. That doesn't mean I forgot. It doesn't mean we went back to being sisters the way we once were. Some things cannot be restored exactly as they were. But healing doesn't always look like restoration. Sometimes healing looks like accepting the truth, setting healthy boundaries, and finally allowing yourself to move forward. Lillian and I exchange letters a few times a year now. They're simple, honest, no pretending, no borrowed identities, just two women trying, in different ways, to become the people they were always meant to be. If this experience taught me anything, it's this. The people who try to steal your identity rarely begin by taking your name. They begin by making you question your own reality. They convince you that your instincts are wrong, that your memories are unreliable, that your boundaries are selfish. Never ignore that quiet voice inside you when something feels deeply wrong. Trust is precious, but it should never require you to surrender your own judgment. And remember this: no one can truly become you, not because they can't copy your signature, your voice, or your appearance, but because they can never steal your character. In the end, that was the one thing no one could ever take from me, and it became the very thing that led me back to myself. If this story touched you in any way, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal or had someone try to take what was yours? We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. And if you think someone else would connect with this message, share it with them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.